Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and good afternoon. This is the Voice of the Cape online Matric revision session, and today we have Danielle Pretorius with us for a revision session on business studies. And I know that it is the holiday period now. Many matriculants are already, at home preparing for the examinations that lie ahead. And so we will be sharing, or rather our facilitator, Danielle Pretorius, who is with the Futures Academy Essays Online High School, will be sharing insight to help you prepare for paper two of the business studies examinations that lie ahead. Good afternoon and welcome, Danielle.
Hi, thank you so much for having me again. It's wrapping up
Yes,
this business session now.
yeah, I see that we already have some students who have joined the session live on our Facebook and our YouTube platform. So we are very, very excited to be hosting them. But also to note that if you know of anyone who can benefit from these sessions, do like and share this video, which will remain on the platforms. You can always refer back to these lessons. So without any further delay, Daniel, I'll be handing over to you to proceed, and you can now share your resources for the session.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So let me start my share. Cool.
There
So,
you go.
yeah, awesome. Thank you so much. So, what I essentially wanted to cover today was so this is going to be our last session for the business. So you remember that in the first lesson we were chatting about examination skills and how you go about answering your paper, and then last week we looked at paper one and specific examination skills for that and how you apply the content to the paper one, and then today we're doing the same for the paper two. Particularly the paper two, as we noted last week, is more content intense. So, what we'll do is we'll start by going through the scope and then we'll look at some scenario questions, particularly focusing on section B for that, and then section C looking at some possible essay questions that they like to ask. So you'll note, contrastingly to the paper one, there are 5 topics on each side. Last week we saw that the paper one is only 5 topics overall. So essentially, what that means is you have to study a lot more in depth for this one. You'll see that a lot of the topics you did cover in term three. So these should look familiar to you. So, just in terms of characterizing what they actually mean by business ventures, because I think this grouping is quite helpful for you to logically make sense of the topics as well. Business ventures, as in starting a new business venture, starting a new business, um, looking at things that you would consider when you start a business. So, management and leadership, investment, securities or opportunities, investment, insurance. Then the forms of ownership with the focus on how they can contribute to the success or failure of a business. And then lastly, presentation and data response. In terms of business roles, these are the different roles that you can assume in a business. So, ethics and professionalism, creative thinking and problem solving, the business's role in social responsibility and corporate citizenship, the business's role in human rights, inclusivity, and environmental issues, and the business's role in team performance assessment and conflict management. So I hope that made it make a little bit more sense. What I want to point out once again is this is the examination guidelines you'll see here, straight from the Department of Basic Education. And what's really nice is they give this classification of subtopics and then they go and break them up even more in depth. So they tell you here what you should be able to do under each topic. So if these are the types of questions that you will get under each, what you should be able to do. So questions based on case studies, scenarios, and essay questions on this one. So it's quite nice to go through this because it gives you a very in-depth scope of each subtopic and what you should be able to do for each. So as we've seen now, the business paper 2 is slightly more content heavy. And I think particularly in the NSC exams, when you have so many exams back to back, because you take like a minimum of 7 subjects, it's important that you don't get burnt out by the paper two, because oftentimes students will do better in the paper one than they do in the paper two. I think oftentimes the paper two is scheduled a bit later, it's also just a little bit more content intense. So just make sure that you also give yourself enough time so that you don't get burnt out by the time you write the paper two, especially because it's 2 papers of 150 marks. Um, and they count the same. So it's important that you do well in both and keep your marks consistent. So, in terms of these topics, I wanted to now just look at how they generally assess a paper two or ask paper two questions. So, I'll use this example. This is the Eastern Cape National Senior Certificate June 2022, paper two. So again, you'll see that the instructions page is the exact same as the paper one. So again, section A, you answer all the questions. Section B, 3 direct or indirect type questions. Section C, 2 essay questions, you answer any one. So please make sure that you follow this, because there are still students in term 3 who've written their prelims that still don't do this. So it's important that you know, answer any 2 in section B and then 1 in section C. If you don't, like I said in the last class, you won't make time. So what I would recommend is the essay takes you the longest, I would say. So make sure you reserve a bit of extra time for yourself for your essay questions. I find that students generally need a bit more time on that. We'll chat about some techniques for that in a bit. So again, you have your section A multiple choice, then you have to fill the word in, and then you have a match column. And then specifically what I want to focus on is the section B and section C. So similarly to the paper one, your question 2 will be business ventures, your question 3 will be business roles, and then question 4 will be a miscellaneous, which is a combination of business ventures and business roles. Then similarly, your essay, the one question is business ventures, the second question is business roles. So as you go through past papers, I would recommend to download a bunch from the Department of Basic Education's website and do it beforehand, because oftentimes what happens closer to the exam dates is there are so many students downloading it that the website actually crashes. So make sure you download them in advance and start going through them early on, because it is a very, very good way to study. And it's a way for you to test your knowledge to a T as to how they're going to do it in the exam. So in terms of the essays, you'll see they like to ask the investment topic, and then with the business roles, they really like to ask all of them. But similarly to how in the paper one, the legislation for business environment is particularly susceptible to essay questions. In the paper two, the business ventures, they really like to ask the investment and insurance, and then they also like to ask forms of ownership with the focus on how they can contribute to the success or failure of a business. Note that in grade 10 and 11, you did the forms of ownership. In grade 12, they want you to specifically focus on how it contributes to the success or failure of a business. So you'll see they'll have sections like how management in a partnership can contribute to the success or failure in a business, and then you need to know that. So note that the focus here is not on what the form of ownership is, but how they can contribute to the success or failure. So we'll look at some examples of essay questions that generally pop up. But I think let's start first by going through the section B. So, like I said, you can't really be strategic in the way that we kind of looked at being for the paper one, in that there's an equal amount of topics on both sides. So, what I would recommend for you is to find the topic that you are most confident in for example, business ventures or business roles, not the subtopic. Um, and for a lot of students, I think it will be the business roles, just because the investment securities and opportunities is very technical. And they also want you here to be able to calculate simple and compound interest. So, for that reason, because of these investment and also the content heaviness of the success or failure, a lot of students find this one a bit more simple just because it's more aligned with the theoretical part of the business studies. So I guess find the one that you are most comfortable with, study that one really well, and then use that one for your essay question as well. And then obviously study this one also very well because you're going to have to answer then a section B on it. But that's kind of how I would approach strategizing for the paper two. Um, and also, I just want to note that in terms of actually when you're sitting in the examination center answering the paper, I think so many times students make simple mistakes because they're anxious or they're nervous about time. So they read too quickly. So with a business paper, they're very technical about how they want you to present your answer. So it's important that you read the question and make sure that you answer what the question is asking you in business terms. So make sure that you read the questions properly. For example, if they say quote, if they say um, explain the advantages of investing in fixed deposits, make sure to explain the advantages and not just give an overview of what fixed deposits is. If it tells you to show all the calculations for interest because it's 6 marks, make sure you do that. So just read carefully and try take your time, but also keep track of time. There's usually always a clock in the venue, and they will also generally announce like, okay, you have an hour left, you have 2 hours left, whatever. So just pay attention to that as well. So in terms of approaching the section B, we already chatted about how you would maybe choose which questions. Similarly, again, to reiterate from the paper one class, how you choose your questions is you go through these and you see where you will lose the least amount of marks. So, for example, in this question, if you can't answer 3 6-mark questions, you lose 18 marks. In this question, if you can only not answer these 2 questions, you only lose 10 marks. So choose the one where you will be able to get the most amount of marks. Also note that some questions are dependent on the answer of the first. So when you're making kind of your predictions about which one will be the best one for you to answer, just pay attention to that. So with the business ventures, you will see here immediately they start with risk. So this is insurance, or this is investment, interest, also investment, interest, fixed deposits, also investment, management and leadership, insurance, again, insurance. So you can see what I mean by the fact that they really like to focus on the insurance, the investment topics. So investment securities and opportunities, and then investment insurance. You will see here then the essay question for business ventures is investment securities. So really focusing on investment here. What I also want to point out that I noted when I was marking prelims is that oftentimes what happens with the essay questions is students just don't write enough. But that becomes particularly problematic when you have a case like this, where you just have 4 questions for 40 marks. Where here you have subgroups that you can perhaps explain. So if there's a question and you are unsure about which essay question you're going to choose, and the one has more things that you should do, rather do that one because it gives you more guidance. Where here you have to say a lot for each of these to get the marks, where here the marks are more dispersed. So I think let's look first at the business ventures, specifically the insurance topics. I'll also just pull up the memo here now. So again, I would recommend that you use your those booklets from the Western Cape Education Department that we've used, um, and separate them again into the roles and ventures section. For now, I'm just going to use these, which are also from the Department of Basic Education, just because they're grouped. So you'll see here with the investment securities, these are the things that you need to know. So the JSE functions, decision factors, investment opportunities and risks, forms of investments, types of shares, the rights of shareholders, preference versus ordinary shares, investment opportunities and risk, and then calculations interest. So in the paper two, you need to be able to calculate interest. Hence, you can do it without a calculator, but I would rather recommend that you just take with a calculator. It won't be extremely complex interest calculations. We'll do an example now, but you do need to be able to do that. If you've been taking mathematics or even in maths lit in grade 12, you also do simple and compound interest. So from that, you should also be able to know how to do that, but we will quickly rehash that just because they like to ask it. It was asked in school's prelims. So we'll just look at that. So terms here, important to know. They sometimes like to ask these as like, what is the difference between compound and simple interest? So you will see here the factors that should be considered when making investment decisions, explanation of investment decisions, so return on investment, also called ROI, risk, inflation rate, liquidity, and taxation. And then there's a little bit of example questions. So this is what I also wanted to point to here. So oftentimes in the essay questions, they like to ask these. And in terms of how you need to study for the paper two, is I think a lot of times students are like, oh, I'll just need to know this lightly, it's fine. But this is quite technical and they want you to know it in depth. So, like I said, they want you to answer it in a very technical, businessy way. So you need to answer using the terms that they're using in your textbook. Otherwise, the meaning gets changed. So it's important that you use business studies terminology when answering the questions as well. And make sure almost never in business studies will they ask for personal opinion or anything that isn't based on facts that you've learned or theory. So oftentimes students' responses are too broad or too general or they're too emotive. So make sure that your responses are in a business type of language and that you stick to the content that is presented in your textbook. Similarly, for example, to illustrate what I mean by sticking to content that's in your textbook, is oftentimes they will ask something based on a scenario, but it will be something like recommend the ways in which the business can promote creative thinking in the workplace. And then that's actually a heading in the notes with bullet points underneath that you should say. But the way that they phrase it in the section B is they use the scenario. And then what students do often is they apply their answers too much to the scenario. So make sure that the answers that you give just come from your theory and from your content. So I think what we should do is let's keep this here and then we go through the questions. Okay, so give 3 examples of non-insurable risks. So note that it says non-insurable, so risks that cannot be insured. And these are things that your insurance won't cover. So examples of these are like war. So here, examples of non-insurance risks. So these risks are not insured by insurance companies as insurance costs or risks are too high. It still remains the responsibility of the business. Nuclear weapons or war, changes in fashion, improvement or changes in technology, irrecoverable debts, financial loss due to bad management. This is exactly the same as what's in those WCED notes. And what I want to point out is this again aligns really closely to the memo. So what I would suggest is to use those notes to study, because the textbook gives your understanding and explanation and like a deeper grasp of the work. But the way that it is presented in the WCED notes, I'll pull them up quickly to remind you what I'm referring to. So here they're from the WCED, the Western Cape Education Department, and there's a set for each term. So note that how this is exactly the same here as this. So this is the memo, nuclear war, weapons, changes in fashion, nuclear weapons, war, changes in fashion. Okay, so again, it's really important that you give your answers as closely to this, because you could give other things, but these are the non-insurance risks they want you to give. And then the second one, so like I said, they really like to ask the difference between simple and compound interest. So if you get an outline, remember we said that we need to pay attention to when there is split marking. So when you get an outline question, here it says briefly explain in full sentences, and here it's 2 marks at the end of the statement. So you need to give the full fact. So it's 2 marks at the end of the statement. So you need to give 2 facts for 4 marks. So what simple interest is and what compound interest is. So how I like to remember the difference between simple and compound interest is simple interest is very simple. The interest rate stays the same. Well, the interest rate never changes, but the amount of interest that you get each year just stays the same. Compound interest, it is compounded each year. The interest of the previous year is added to the amount of the following year. It is compounded. So in terms of that, we just need to give 2 full sentences. So we would say here, just define for 2 marks what simple interest is, and then for compound interest, you will see the marking allocation here, 2 marks at the end of the statement. If it wasn't, if it said like explain, which here is split marking, how they would give the mark is they would go interest earned on the original amount, 1 mark, and not on the interest accrued, 2nd mark. So split marking is a bit more strict because it breaks up the marks. Here, there's a bit more leniency for the marker to give you an answer if it's similar to this. So you could say any of these things as differences. So they say the answer doesn't have to be in tabular format. The differences do not have to link, but it must be clear. So it doesn't have to link in that, well, simple interest yields less return on investment, compound interest yields high return. You can mix them, but the difference must just be clear. So again, what I pointed out earlier about making sure that you give specific answers that aren't too general. So if you're just talking about interest and not specifically simple or compound, that would be too general to answer this question. And they say award a maximum of 2 marks if the difference is not clear. Mark either simple or compound interest only. Okay, and then we have the scenario, which we will practice now, which I wanted to get to. So read the scenario below and answer the questions that follow. Kevin inherited 50,000 Rand from a late mother's estate and decided to invest the money in a fixed deposit at Cash Bank. Okay. So the bank offered him an interest rate of 12% compounded annually over a period of 3 years. So we have a couple of values here that we need to note. We have the 50,000 Rand, which is the investment amount. We have the interest rate, which is compounded annually. Annually means yearly. So every year it is calculated 3 years. So calculate the interest amount that Kevin will receive after 3 years. Show all calculations. Note that when a question is 6 marks and it says show all calculations, go and do the whole calculation. Do it in the way that how you do simple interest and then do it for each year. Because if you mess up, then you will see in the memo, you can still be awarded marks for your calculations, even if your answer is incorrect. So this is what I meant by I would rather recommend that you just do it like this. So the calculating the compound interest you calculated similarly to the simple interest. So if you earn interest rate of 12% compounded annually, it means you earn 12% of 50,000 Rand a year. So 50,000 times 12,000 is 6,000. So with compound interest, how this is different from simple interest is this 6,000 Rand gets added to the 50 for year 2. If we were to do a simple interest calculation, it would be the 50,000 times 12% is equal to 6,000. The following year, again, the 50,000 times 12 is equal to 6. The same for the third year. So note that here, it's 6,000 and then the interest increases each year. So this is what they mean by it is compounded. So note, you get a mark here, you get a mark here for having the 56 that you've added the interest, the amount you've gotten here, adding it again, the amount, giving the total amount of interest. So what I want to point out here that's really important. So they say calculate the interest amount that he will receive. So this is another point of reading properly. So they're not saying calculate the total with the 50,000. They just want the interest amount. So if you gave this answer of 70,246 Rand 40, which is with the 50,000, that is wrong. It needs to be this. Okay, so make sure that you're reading correctly. And then here is how they allocate the marks. So you get 6 marks if your answer is correct, but no workings are shown. If workings were shown correctly, but the final answer is wrong, award a maximum of 5 marks. If there are no workings shown and the answer is incorrect, allocate a 0 mark. So make sure to show your calculations, because if you mess up somewhere, you can get the marks just because of showing your calculations. And then they say, explain the advantages of investing in a fixed deposit. Okay, so again, here we have an explain, split marking. So we need to give our facts fully. You will see here in our notes that this aligns again to here, fixed deposits, it's investments. So it's that those tables I was scrolling past. Oh, fixed tables, fixed deposit. It's this here. So this is what they want you to know, the positives and the negatives. Note that also if they were to say, what is the impact of investing in fixed deposits? So like we learned here in our first class, if they ask for the impact or they ask you to evaluate or analyze, they want you to give the advantages or positives and or disadvantages and negatives. So what I would do is make sure that if it's phrased in that way, to rather just give both rather than just the positives or just the negatives. So again, it's a 4-mark question and it's explain. So 2 marks for one full fact with split marking. So that means we just need to give 2 advantages. So in a fixed deposit, so note that a fixed deposit is where the amount of interest is fixed and you cannot withdraw your funds out of it. The money is also fixed in it. So interest is earned at a fixed rate, 1 mark, regardless of changes in the economic climate, 2nd mark. So do you see here with the split marking why it's important for you to remember the whole fact? Because students will often just remember interest is earned at a fixed rate. But your 2nd mark is here, regardless of changes in the economic climate. And if you only give 2 for 4 marks, but you only give the half of the answer, you will get half of the questions for that answer. So let's see how they approach this in the memo with the marking. So you'll see here, like I said, interest is earned at a fixed rate 1 mark, regardless of changes in the economic climate. So the period of investment can be over short, medium, long term. The period of investment can be over a short, medium, long term. Investors can choose the investment period that suits them. Investors can choose the investment period that suits them. So it's important for you to remember the whole fact, otherwise you lose marks. So here we have a discuss question, personal attitude and successful leadership. So this is part of the management and leadership topic in business ventures, and it's for 6 marks. And if they tell us to discuss, we apply split marking. So again, we need to give 3 facts and we need to give them fully. So the management and leadership module, I think what's also very important there to know that they like to ask is the difference between leadership and management. So yeah, I don't want to go over all of this too much. I'm scared we're going to run out of time. So again here, I just want to chat about this because they say motivate your answer. So here they ask you to identify the leadership style used, and then you motivate your answer by quoting from the scenario above. So when you quote from the scenario, make sure to just rather write the whole sentence, because oftentimes students will only write a phrase, but to be safe, rather instead write the whole sentence. So this just gives context. Your answer's motivation would be this. Note how this is marked is that you will get 2 marks for the leadership style and 1 mark for motivating your answer. If you do not get the leadership style correct, the motivation is generally not marked as correct. And then this is what I meant by questions being contingent on the one before. If you were not able to identify the leadership style correctly in 2.5.1, in 2.5.2, if you give the wrong leadership style, you automatically lose these 4 marks because this question is contingent on your answer of the one above. Then the 2 principles of insurance, indemnity, and utmost of good faith. Under those, they want you to discuss them. So you'll see it's 6 marks. And with a discuss question like that, where there's like 2 headers and then subpoints underneath, how the mark is given is you will get, so here where they say, where was this? Discuss. State heading, 2 marks. Write an explanation, 1 mark. So you get 2 marks for each of your principles and 1 mark for the explanation of each of them. And then they say advise businesses on the advantage of insurance for 4 marks. So you need to give 2 advantages of insurance. Then in terms of the business roles topic, I think also really important, here it is, this question. You need to know the differences between ethical and professional behavior. If they ask you what is ethical behavior, for 4 marks, you need to be able to give 2 facts on what is ethical behavior and 2 facts on what is professional behavior. They really like to ask this. So here we have creative thinking and problem solving. Again, they want you to identify it from the scenario and quote. So that means writing it over word for word, the sentence. It would be this. Discuss ways businesses can create an environment that promotes creative thinking in the workplace. Explain the importance of team dynamic theories. So here we have ethics and professionalism, creative thinking and problem solving. Then we have here the team dynamic theories, so the team performance and assessment. And then note, if they ask you to use the table as a guide, please put your answers, like draw a table in your paper and answer in a table. Note again, motivations, you need to quote them from the scenario. To show that you've done this, you put it in inverted commas, okay? And then explain how businesses could apply the force field analysis to solve business problems. So, what I want you to note here is this is part of the creative thinking and problem solving module. And that module has quite a bit of content in that. Obviously, it's not going to be in here. In that there is quite a few methods that you can use to solve business problems. And these methods, they want you to know them in depth. So it's not enough to just know the general gist of these. You'll see, for example, a 6-mark question on how you apply force field analysis. So not only do they want you to know what it is, but they also want you to know the steps on how you would carry it out. So here, if we go to the so the creative thinking and problem solving, I'm not going to spend time looking for it now. I'll just find it here on the here. Okay, so this is what I meant by the different techniques. So you'll see there is this here, impact of problem solving techniques. So you have the Delphi technique, the force field analysis, brainstorming, mind mapping, nominal group technique, Scamper. And then they want you to know this application of it as well. So it's quite a lot to know, but it's not enough for you to just know, oh, this is what the empty chair technique is, this is what force field analysis is, these. You need to be able to explain the steps to carry these out as well. This becomes particularly a problem for students in the essay questions, because then they struggle to give the steps to carry this out. So in the essay questions, they'll often ask, like, what is it? And then how businesses can apply it. So explain how businesses could apply the force field analysis to solve business problems. So that's, they want the steps to doing the force field analysis. So that would be here, application of the force field analysis. Describe the current situation and the desired situation. List all the driving and restraining forces. Allocate a score to each force using a scale where 1 is weak and 5 is strong. So let's look at how they mark this, because it's an explain one. So again, we need to pay attention to whether split marking is applied. So here we see that, so again, the split marking, describe the current situation, 1 mark, and the desired situation. List all the driving and restraining forces that will support and resist change, your second one. Allocate a score to each force where 1 is weak and 5 is strong. So you cannot just say weigh up the positives and negatives. You need to give the full facts. If you're scared of you losing marks because you're not giving the full fact in when split marking is applied, what I would recommend is to rather give more than 3 then, if you're scared of losing marks with the split marking. Because it's not, if they say give 5 ways the business can apply it, then I can't mark past the 5th one. But if they don't, then you can give as many as you'd like, and I will only stop marking once I get your 6 marks. So if you're unsure with the split marking, rather just write 1 or 2 more responses on that, just to be sure that you don't lose any marks because you didn't give the fact fully. So what I want to get to now, because we only have 15 minutes left, is the essay questions. So here, what I've done is I've gone over a couple of past papers, and for the business ventures, the essay questions that they commonly like to ask is the investment, securities, presentation topic, so presentation and data response, and management and leadership. So the difference between a manager and a leader. I'll show some examples now. So here, investment securities again, and then business roles, social responsibility. That was the May-June paper last year. If we look at the other papers, let's take the paper 2 from 2021. So the presentation, so the factors that must be considered, the impact of handouts and whiteboards, how the presenter should handle feedback, team performance, and conflict management. So how they generally like to ask these, and what you'll note is you need to know your topics quite in depth, as I've been saying. So we'll do this one as an example, the business ventures, investment securities. They like to ask this one, and like I said, the investment securities, the whole investment section, they quite like to focus on for the paper 2. So here I have an example of one. I believe it's the one we just actually looked at. Just pull up the applicable question. Cool. Okay, so I'll put these two here so we can contrast them because they're on the same topic, but you can see how they ask different things on the same topic. So here on investment securities, they give us a little scenario and then they give us what we need to say for 40 marks. So note that the scenario is only really helpful to like contextualize it for you and maybe when you're making your practical examples, but beyond that, the little scenario here isn't really helping you that much. It's not something you have to refer to. So they give us a statement. You'll see that each of these align to one of the bullet points here. So businesses offer different kinds of shares and the rights applicable to each share differs. Explain the rights of preference shareholders. Investors must have a sound knowledge of factors to be considered before making an informed investment decision. Explain the following factors that should be considered when making investment decisions. Investment in shares listed on the JSE comes with responsibilities as much as rewards. So, the impact of shares advise businesses on the functions of the JSE. So, contrastingly or conversely, here we have another question, but they ask something else. So, investing in a fixed deposit provides investors the opportunity to decide whether they want to receive simple interest or compound interest. Investors must also consider various types of shares before making investment decisions. Some invest in companies that are listed on the JSE. So they ask us to outline the differences between simple and compound interest, to explain the advantages of a fixed deposit as a form of investment, to discuss any 3 types of shares, and to advise the business on functions of the Johannesburg Securities Exchange. So that question is similar to the one that was here. Note that with these, you still have to pay attention to the action verbs because that's going to show you if split marking is applied or not. That is still applicable to the essay. Also, what's important with an essay question is with your marks for structure, the FLASO mark or the LASO mark, for your synthesis mark, it's important that you only answer questions given here. So if they ask you to explain the advantages of a fixed deposit and you're like, oh, I don't have enough advantages, I'm just going to write disadvantages. You're deviating from the questions asked and that can negatively affect your synthesis mark. So make sure you stick to the questions that are given here. So I'll use this as an example and we can work through it. So the first thing that we need to do, building from the class on how we do an essay. So this is the same essay question as the one we just looked at. So the first thing we do is we need to figure out our headings on what we need to speak about. So all we do is we take away the action verbs. So our first heading will obviously always be introduction. And then our following heading, after we take out the action verb, the differences between simple interest and compound interest. Our second heading in the body, the advantages of a fixed deposit as a form of investment. The third, three types of shares. The last one, the functions of the Johannesburg Securities Exchange. And then conclusion. Note that you do not write body here before the differences. So don't write this, okay? You don't write body, you just start with the headings. So the differences between simple interest and compound interest. So what I would recommend and what you'll see is done in the memo is the easiest way for you and the quickest way I think is to give your answers in like bullet point format, because when you're doing it with a in terms of a paragraph, you have to spend time crafting linking sentences to put it all together. And you'll see that in the memo, they also give the answers to the questions in that way. So you'll see here all the answers are bulleted. So in the business essay, I think oftentimes it's important students don't conceptualize it as they should, because it's very different from a normal essay, because it has almost no creative writing. All you need to do is you need to give facts from your textbook. It's basically long answer questions. So all of this is exactly like it is in your textbook. You literally just have to copy and paste from your head into your answer book. So we start with an introduction. And in your introduction, remember, we said you don't introduce your topic in a business studies essay. All you do is you give general facts. So you give any general facts on simple compound interest, fixed deposits, shares, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So you will see here then in the memo. So, simple interest and compound interest enables investors to cater for their investment needs and financial planning. Fixed deposit is a popular form of investment as the risk is low. Various types of shares offer different types of dividends and risks associated with them. So, note any 2 times 1 for the mark allocation. So, in your introduction, you need to give 2 facts for 2 marks. Conversely, in your conclusion, you need to give 1 fact for 2 marks. So just pay attention to that. Also note that if you don't get the marks in your introduction, because it's counted together in your F mark, which is also made up of this here, and as we saw last week and as I explained in our first class, it's not that you have to fulfill these maximums for each subheading to get the max of 32. If you tally these up, they come up to way more than 32. So you could still make up your marks here. So then we have our first heading, the differences between simple and compound interest. Then one subheading, compound interest. So, and then we give our facts underneath. So with the essay, literally just give it as it is in your notes. So don't try string it together as an essay. Answer it like a question in section B. What is the difference between simple interest and compound interest? But act like that question is out of 10 marks. Because here, so an essay is out of 40 marks. And here there's 4 questions. So let's say that then on average it's 10 marks for each question. So that's 5 full facts under each. So that's how I would approach figuring out how much you should write under each. We spoke about it last week as well, and we said that we would aim for around 4 or 5 under each. So the next one then would be the advantages of a fixed deposit as a form of investment. And then here you see is the answers. Interest is earned at a fixed rate. The period of investment can be short, medium, long term. So this was actually one of the questions in the section B when we looked at the other paper. Then the 3 types of shares. So how this will be marked, you will get 2 marks for naming the share and then you get a couple of marks here. So note, because it is in the section B, it's not like it's 3 marks, 3 marks, 3 marks. When we look at the memo, you will see that they give here. So you get 2 marks for the name, and then you give 2 facts under each for a submax of 6. So you get 4 marks for your discussion, so two facts, 2 marks for stating the type for a submaximum of 6. For the advantages of a fixed deposit, you could get a maximum of 10 marks. For this one, you could get a maximum of 4 marks for what you said on simple interest. So 2 facts on simple interest, 2 facts on compound interest. So again, it says mark the first 3 only. So if you're unsure of one and you've just added another one, rather cross out the one you were unsure of, because otherwise I have to mark the first 3 and scratch out the last one. And then the functions of the JSE, so you could give 6 for a maximum of 12 marks. And then your conclusion, like we said, it is 2 marks for one full fact. So you can just end off with a general fact. So here, this knowledge of simple and compound interest will allow an investor to do further research on the latest development in investment opportunities. A better understanding of different types of shares may enable investors to choose the best type of investment. And then here you will see, remember, please, guys, you guys keep, or not you guys specifically, but just in general, students keep forgetting to add your practical examples. Make sure that they're relevant as well. So when you're explaining something like the types of shares listed on, or what the JSE does, and you're giving an example, make sure that it's applicable to what the JSE does and it's not just too random. So what they mean by practical is that it's like explains what you were trying, it explains what you were trying to explain, and it relates to real life, hence practical. So we do that, we do our headings for our layout, we give enough facts for our interpretation, we answer only the questions given in the order they are given for our synthesis mark, and like that, we will get 40 marks for our essay. So it is possible to get full marks for business essay. It is much more rare to get full marks in an essay that requires a bit more of creative writing. But because this one really only requires facts, you can really get full marks for your essay. And because it is 50 marks, that's almost a third of the paper. So it's really important that you spend enough time answering your essay question, especially for the paper 2, where you may struggle a bit more with the section B because the work is more content heavy. But yeah, that is all from me. Best wishes, I suppose. I'm rooting for you, and I hope you guys do great.
Thank you so much, Danielle, for joining us today. And yes, all the best to all our grade 12s preparing for the upcoming examination. Tomorrow we have you back and we'll be covering history.
Yes, we'll be doing the history paper 1.
Wonderful. Thanks once again and have a wonderful day. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh and good afternoon.
Thank you.